Thank you. We're just doing a medium. We're going on the fly here.
No worries.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and because that's what we want to do. Oops. Okay. Okay, we've got 3 of the people. I think we had about 6 people on that. So let's just give everyone another minute.
Okay.
Another minute to join us. Nora is here. There's always technical difficulties at times. It looks like we lost a few people in that exchange because we did 6 people on 7, including me, that were on that last webinar. Okay, let's just get started. I'm hoping the other people come in a minute.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Nora. Nora is going to tell us a little bit about her journey in history, and I've had a little sneak peek and was able to see her bio, and I'm super interested that she studied U.S. history in London. I think that's awesome. At first, Nora's going to give a little introduction about herself. She's going to talk about history and then talk about her journey from high school to a PhD candidate, and a little bit about just how she got to where she is. This is an Ask Me Anything type of webinar. So feel free to put questions in the chat as we're going through. Don't feel like you have to wait until the end. Like, we want to know what you're asking and you're thinking. And you know what? Now that we're actually on a webinar, you can do a reaction. You can raise your hand. You can actually unmute yourself if you want and actually, speak. So welcome. And again, we want you to ask questions. We want you to get as much out of this webinar as possible. So I'll let it go over to Nora.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. Sorry about the little glitch. I am finishing up my PhD in history, in US history at University College London. I am giving my defense in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, May 9th, so that's quite soon. I have a background, as you can see on this slide, a master's in Middle East studies and a bachelor's degree in the study of religion. So in all of those courses, though, I was generally taking history courses. So study of religion and Middle Eastern studies are generally considered interdisciplinary degrees. So you could take, for example, anthropology or art or philosophy or whatever the case may be, and it all satisfies those requirements. But I've always been sort of very historically minded, so I was always taking history courses. My research focuses on U.S. the Ottoman Empire. For those that don't know, it covers the territories that we now call the Middle East. So I'm looking specifically or especially at what's now modern Turkey, where there was a large Armenian population, especially in the 19th century when I focus. So I look a lot at the relationship between the Ottoman areas, Ottoman Turkey, and the United States, and especially the people in those 2 places. So I'm I wrote a dissertation on basically the first Middle Eastern American. He was an Armenian man from Turkey who came to New York City in the 1830s and spent his whole career in the United States really trying to, correct negative stereotypes that people might have had about people from the Middle East. But then also he used very spectacular, entertaining methods of doing this, which sometimes kind of use the same stereotypes that he was trying to correct. But he also had very serious political objectives. So he wanted to be a diplomat, a U.S. diplomat in Turkey. He wanted to have reform in the Ottoman Empire. And so I think a lot about how he was using entertainment to pursue serious political goals. And as I guess you can tell from that project, I really think a lot about biography to do history. Another way of thinking about that is called microhistory. So microhistory is a way of doing history. It's usually looking at something small, whether that's an individual life or a place or a specific tour, or like a tour. Someone came to the United States for 6 months and you can write about their experience, that kind of thing. So it's, you look at something small, but you can think about something big, like a big idea through that. So we can talk more about that if that's interesting to anybody. Before or after college, but before grad school, I didn't know I wanted to go to grad school. And so I did a bunch of different things. I worked as a paralegal at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which you might have seen in the news recently when they indicted President Trump. I then worked in development fundraising at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Both of these jobs were in New York City, and they both represented they were such New York experiences, but in very, very different ways. So I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything, even though I'm not in law or in museums right now. After the Met, I went to do fundraising back at Harvard because at that point I started to think I wanted to do grad school. I started this job thinking I would do, they have a museum studies degree through their extension school. And it's the kind of thing where if you work, you could take classes for free. The job wasn't what I hoped it would be. And so I ended up just applying to grad school. And that's when I started doing my master's in Middle East studies. After the master's, I actually started my PhD at Harvard in the same program, but then owing to some personal losses, I left the program and had another moment where I wasn't quite sure exactly what I wanted to do. And that's when I started college consulting, helping students get into college. And that was great. But at some point I realized, I really do want to be a historian. I'd like to go back to do my PhD. And at that time I was a little bit older and I thought, okay, you know what? I know what my dissertation topic is going to be. London, you can do PhDs in the UK where they're 3 or 4 years versus 7, 8, 9, 10 years in the United States. And I also at that point realized I wanted to take a US history look at the life of this man who I've just finished writing about from the Middle East. And I thought it would be interesting to do it in London and to really get that global perspective that I was looking for, because this man came to America, but he kept his ties in the Middle East. And I wanted to have kind of like an outsider's perspective of the United States, because I thought that would make me think better about what I was seeing. And it wouldn't be coming from the inside. I wouldn't be, there's less a risk of being caught then in these narratives that become as much about affirming your identity as an American, right? Versus just kind of looking at the past and thinking about what was going on. And so it was just an interesting perspective. I have to say it worked out very well. It's been very interesting to see the United States be studied and in the present day from the perspective of people in the UK. And it really has given me that sort of global perspective of my work that I was hoping for. In this work, I've been awarded in some ways. I funded my PhD with a Armenian Studies scholarship. So again, Armenian Studies is another interdisciplinary field, and I've always taken that historical approach. There are many ways to fund a UK PhD if anyone's interested in that. A lot of funding comes from the universities themselves, but it's not like the way here. I don't know if anyone here knows about PhDs, but a lot of times there's funding is given in many programs, but in the UK you have to apply separately for different kind of funding bodies. So I applied to this foundation that I knew supported Armenian Studies scholarship. They're actually based in Portugal. I won a grant from the Society for the History of American Foreign Relations to study Armenian language. And I also won a research grant from the American Periodicals Research Group, because I use a lot of 19th century newspapers and periodicals in my research. And so they thought I was worth supporting. So that's a little bit of background about me. I'm happy to take any questions at any point, but yeah. So history, yeah, how do I define the history field? So history for me is the study of the past, put quite simply, the study of the people who lived in the past, and thinking about the ways the people who lived in the past thought about their world. So for me, it's just a way of basically extending our universe even further. It has the added bonus, I feel, in that it often becomes a mystery. You become a detective because you can't just like watch a movie of every day in the past. You're only able to figure out what anyone was thinking via the sources that remain. Those are incomplete sources, even people who've left us their diaries and their letters and all these sorts of things. You can't know everything. For someone I'm studying, the fragmentary nature of that archive is even more pronounced because we don't have like a box of his letters or a box of his diaries. We have the stuff that he published himself, like the primary sources, so a few books he wrote, that kind of thing. He was written about in the newspapers at the time quite frequently. So I would say that I built out the skeleton of my research by looking him up in the newspapers and figuring out what he was doing when, what people were saying about him, this kind of thing. But I am still finding new sources. It pops up in very unexpected places. I will say I've made genuine historical connections via eBay because someone happens to be selling something of his from 1863, that kind of thing. This project could not probably have been done without Google or digitized newspapers because I'm able to look at newspapers from everywhere from Ohio to Pennsylvania to Maine to South Carolina to New York City. And in a different era, I would not have done the legwork. It would have been impossible also to scour through decades and decades and decades of newspapers in every state, whereas now you can enter a search term and see where this person comes up. So it's pretty amazing. So for me, I guess that's the next question. Why is studying history important and exciting? It helps us understand the people who came before, which is, to my mind, the best way to understand anything in the present. If you want to understand why anything is the way it is, you have to understand how it came to be that way. And you can have a history that goes back to, 6,000 BC. You can also have a history basically of the present, where you are just analyzing how something is, why something is, and connecting it to the things in the further past that have made it that way. So for example, a project I'm working on, building on my dissertation project, is to look at how Armenians over time have gotten the world to care about their cause. And so the person I'm studying takes us through about 1900. In 1915, there was the Armenian genocide. There was a famous woman there was a woman who whose family died in the genocide, and she came to the United States and she wrote a memoir, and there was a silent movie made about her memoir starring her, and there was a whole kind of entertainment network that came out of her work. And so I'm looking at her, and then I'm looking in the present day with the Kardashian family when they use their platforms to talk about Armenian genocide recognition, or the current issue in Azerbaijan and Armenia. So using, again, celebrity and entertainment to bring attention to the Armenian cause. So I think it's the most important thing to understand the world today. And I think it's exciting because it not only helps you understand the world better, but it's so fun to be a detective and figure out the past, really. So some career paths for those that study history. The classic career path is to be a history professor. The market right now for history professor jobs is dwindling. There's a lot of issues in higher education with things like funding the humanities and funding priorities. And so this is one of these crises in the field, but that is still often the ideal career for many. But it is not by any means the only way to practice history. Public history is a giant field and can mean many things. That can mean working in a museum or a national park or a historic house or any sort of institution that presents history to a public. That could mean making documentaries, Ken Burns' documentaries being kind of the example. I don't know if any of you have watched Finding Your Roots. That's another example of a popular show that appeals to sort of a historical mindset. Writing, of course, for a wider audience than a academic audience. So you can write whether for newspapers. Journalism is a great thing to do with a history degree, but also books or magazine writing or any kind of writing that brings attention to history for the public. Law school. History is a great preparation for law school. It teaches you to think critically and to really understand the contexts in which laws are created and operate. Laws cannot be understood as like poetry that you just read and it makes you feel something. They operate in societies and they have histories. And so if you want to be a lawyer, studying history is great. I personally believe that if you wanted to study history in college, for example, that is not mutually exclusive with being pre-med or going on to be a doctor or an engineer. Yes, you have to meet your course requirements for things like pre-med or engineering. But for example, I went to school with a woman who is now a doctor in one of the best hospitals in Boston, but she was also an art history major. She majored in art history and she was pre-med, and I believe she also played water polo or something. So she was like very busy and determined, but it just teaches you to think about the world. And I would argue that even the best scientists are thinking about the world in the present and the past, and how even the science they do, the way they heal, the people who come to them for help are products of societies and environments and circumstances, all of which have a history. And the better you understand that, the more compassionate and present I think you can be as a medical provider. And so I think really you can do anything with a history degree.
Okay, let's think. What sparked your interest in U.S. history?
Yeah. So what sparked my interest in U.S. history? In many ways, I feel like I was born into a house that worshipped U.S. history. And so it was there from the beginning for me. I always was the kid who was asking my parents, like, what happened in the olden days or whatever. It was always like, I knew it existed. So I wanted to understand more about it. And I think also I was always like aesthetically interested in the past. I liked the way old things looked. I knew I liked old houses. I knew I liked things that were older, and that kind of that draws you in. I was interested about my parents' life. I was interested about the stuff I would see in my grandmother's house. That's all takes you back. They're all portals to an earlier time. And so it's just always been there for me.
What classes did you take in high school and college?
Sure. So in high school, I won the award or whatever for like best history or social studies student. And when I won the award, my teacher said to me, it's just, you took every damn course we offered. So I took like every course in high school that was available to me, which, wasn't a ton, but like every AP government, AP US history, AP European history, these kinds of things. I wish there were actually more to take. When I got to college, I took largely history of religion courses, especially 19th century religious history in the United States. So like the Transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, thinking about social gospel, which was, the sort of religious movements to improve society. I remember taking a course on Islam, which was based on it was called the vocabulary of Islam. And what that did was it was basically about building religious literacy. So understanding what different words meant and how that connected to a faith tradition. And that really opened my world to the Islamic world, which is actually where I would end up going academically. And this wasn't until my senior spring, which is actually a piece of advice I could give everyone, which is that I really kind of took the approach of almost studying what I knew and just going deeper. And I wish I had earlier studied more of what I didn't know, because it can be quite influential. And part of me didn't feel like I could. I kind of felt like I had to study what I felt like I already knew a little bit about, like I was only allowed to. And maybe part of it was just my palate hadn't matured yet. I don't know, but I would encourage people to take courses about things they don't know about.
I have a quick question that's not on here. What extracurriculars did you do in high school, but also in college, that kind of connected to your interest in history?
That's an interesting question. So my extracurriculars I'm trying to think of any of that have connected. So my biggest extracurricular in college was I ran the student museum group, and we did tours of the museums. We hosted nights at the museums. I almost brought a picture of me leading a tour at the museum for this, but I didn't. And we didn't have something like that in high school.
Okay.
But it was certainly like thinking about presenting history through museums was on my mind in high school. And I think college represented for me an opportunity to things that I felt like I couldn't do in high school or didn't have avenues to do in high school. I think now thinking back, I think I could have maybe taken more initiative, but it was a different era, I guess. Now where I think just from seeing students apply to college, we're in an era more of initiative, professionalization, these kinds of things.
What do you plan to do after obtaining your PhD?
Yes, so I have a fellowship next year back at Harvard, and I'm planning on turning my dissertation into a book. And so that is largely what I will do. Hopefully I'll have an opportunity to do some teaching as well. And then the goal is to find a job where I can be a historian. Now that could be, I'm not willing, the academics, many academics will lament that they have to, go to somewhere that's away from their family and friends in order to get a job. I have a 5-month-old son, and I'm pretty rooted at this point in time, and so I don't think we're going to make any big moves. So my challenge to myself is going to be to find a way to be a historian, no matter what maybe the job listings say. This could mean creating my own company. This could mean finding writing projects. This could mean working with students. This could mean many things. I'm hoping I will figure it out, or it will reveal itself soon.
Okay. Exciting. Okay. Your experience at Harvard and the University College London, can you tell us a little bit about it? What was the admissions process like? Professors, campus life, things like that?
Yeah. So I would say in all admissions processes, especially after undergraduate admissions, you are going to want and need to develop relationships with professors.
Mm-hmm.
That's done in the first instance, usually via an email. expressing familiarity with the person's work and saying, this is what you want to study. You would be a wonderful advisor for me for X, Y, and Z reasons. Would you be interested in working with me? That matters in the United States. It really matters in the UK, where basically you kind of apply almost as a team, that your advisor is really a part of your application. They basically, if they want you, that carries a lot of weight. It's similar in the United States, but it's not as direct, I would say. You will find that in general, relationships are going to open doors for you. That's the very transactional way of thinking about it. Relationships are what's going to make you grow and learn, and it's what's going to turn you into the person you are. But from a very, very practical standpoint, it's how opportunities arise. It's someone standing up for you. It's someone arguing for you. It's someone's pushing your application through. And so that's just an important thing to keep in mind. Yeah. And then in terms of campus life, University College London is in the middle of London. It's like going to school in London. I couldn't recommend it highly enough. When I applied to PhDs, I applied to one school because I figured if I'm going to go to the UK for my PhD, I just want to be in London. That's what I want. COVID hit, 6 months into my program, so I ended up home for almost all of my degree. But it's an amazing campus. Harvard similarly is right in the middle of Cambridge, which is right, bordering Boston, and both schools are really what I personally like in a school, which is kind of that blending into the community, and just feeling like you have access to everything, and that you're only buoyed by the university with which you're affiliated. And so I can speak highly of both institutions. I was not an undergrad at UCL. I know at Harvard, their general approach is very sink or swim, very find your own way. Basically, you can do anything, but you have to figure out how to do it. And that's kind of amazing. It can be very hard, particularly because not everyone comes in as a freshman with the same life experiences, the same opportunities, the same resources. And so it can be very harsh at the same time. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Okay. Did you take any classes on US, like this is a US history, obviously you did in London, but you focused on Armenian history. Did you take any? So when my daughter did a semester in London, I was like, you have to take like a class on the American Revolution from the British point of view. And she did try. Alas, it was like filled, so she couldn't get in. But did you, just out of curiosity, because you're studying US history,
Yeah.
did you have any classes on that? And like how, like, did it change your view on something that we all learn it in school, how many different years in school, in
Yes.
schools. So like, how did you take any of those classes? How did it change your viewpoint?
Yes. So when you're doing your PhD in the UK, you don't necessarily need to take coursework in the same way. But that said, my advisor is a British, actually Welsh, US historian. And my friends are all, they're all teaching these courses that you're talking about.
Okay.
And basically, there is a lack of romanticism about US history that you will find frequently here. They don't say things that you will find here in very standard courses about, like the American dream or manifest destiny. I mean, those things are really they're never said uncritically, for example. Yeah. Also, I'm a part of a larger trend in US history called like transnational US history, or US in the world. And many US historians in the UK are very sensitive to that, thinking about the United States without that exceptionalist lens. I don't know if anyone here has learned about sort of this American exceptionalism narrative. And so what this transnational US history trend seeks to do is show that the United States is not special. It's a part of the world, just like any other countries. It's connected to other parts of the world. It's responsive to the same forces. And in fact, it acts on other parts of the world as well. It's been influenced by and influences other parts of the world. And so that's a big trend amongst non-American US historians as well.
Again, I just think it's interesting to get that other viewpoint. So very
yes.
Okay, can you talk to us a little bit about your mentors?
Yes. So you can see in this photo two of my mentors. One is my former advisor and future advisor at Harvard, like the preeminent Ottoman historian. His name is Jamal Kafadar. And then on the right-hand side, the woman on the far right, her name is Lerna Ekmekcioglu, and she actually teaches history at MIT. She's an Armenian from Turkey. And both of these people have really supported my journey for over a decade now. And they've just trusted me from very early on, from when I was a master's student. And it's like, why did they even take me seriously? But they did. And like I was saying before, I mean, these people in many ways have made my career possible, both probably institutionally through the letters they write and the people they talk to, but also in just trusting me. I mean, it's radically informed what I've been able to do, just knowing that they believe in me. So that's them.
Okay. So I think that also answered your professional development.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you become a Polygence mentor?
Sure. So I became a Polygence mentor because the opportunity was presented to me and it sounded like something I would love to do, which is talk to a younger student about what they find interesting and exciting, and help them do a project in a way that is not often available to them in a school setting. I think it's a great opportunity to be able to do, say, research or a long-term project in a way that's more like what they might do in college or grad school. And I thought that I could also learn a lot from working with someone doing that kind of work.
Okay. Can you talk about the students you've worked with, your Polygence mentees, and like some of the projects that they've done?
Yeah. So one of my students, which was so interesting, lived in Massachusetts, but in one of the or maybe the only county that voted predominantly Republican. And so he really wanted to understand why his county was voting Republican when everyone around him otherwise was voting Democrat. Generally, if you think about a map, like everyone else was blue and this was, a red county. So he talked to people in his town, and he did focus groups and surveys and had conversations, and he put together a little booklet basically about what he found, what people thought about various issues, what people thought about it even meant to vote. And so I found this project so inspiring because it was him thinking about the place he lived in, using his incredible familiarity and rapport with the people in his town to understand something better that also speaks to places outside of his town and county. And so I really liked just the nature of that project, the initiative he took, and the way it really bridged like the national and the local, which is clearly my sweet spot, bridging this like micro and macro perspective.
Okay. Are there any other examples that you have of other students?
Sure. So one of my other students.
Let me just pause for a minute. Did that student finish? What was their final project? Was it
It was a booklet, I believe, that he wanted to distribute to people in his community. So actually was given back to his community in many ways.
Great. Okay. So what can you give us another example of us?
Yeah. So another student worked lived in Portland, Oregon, and he worked especially with refugees in the community, and he wanted to better understand kind of the history of refugee policy in the United States, especially the recent history of, our rules and policies around refugee admittance. And so he produced a paper, which I believe he was submitting to various places for publication. He also, I forget, this was also around COVID. He planned to give a webinar to his community. Again, he was thinking about talking to his community about Portland's refugee population. And so he wanted to help them get to know these people who were a part of their community and maybe they weren't familiar with. So actually, it's very similar in that he was thinking about the place he lived and the questions he had, and then bringing that information back to the community he lived in.
Great. Okay. What advice would you give a student looking to further explore the history field?
Sure. So I guess it depends on what stage you're at. I think Google is honestly a great entry point. If you are curious about something, if you are interested in like the Holocaust or the plague or something less terrible, like, I don't know, like fashion in the 1960s, do a Google and follow it, see where it takes you, read an article, see what they reference. A lot of being a historian is going to be chasing footnotes, as my advisor calls it. Same thing where you can chase links, you just see where it takes you. Another task or activity I like to give students also who I'm helping apply to college is oral histories. So oral histories are where you talk to people about their experiences, and that forms the basis of your historical work. And so many people have people in their life who have lived, who have done interesting things that they know nothing about. Talk to your parents. Maybe your parents, I have a student right now, parents immigrated from Venezuela. His grandparents are still in Venezuela. Maybe ask them about their experiences. Why did you immigrate? What's it like living there now? I worked with students who are Greek, and maybe they want to ask their grandparents about their experiences in Greece. Or my whole historical career actually started by trying to learn more about my great-grandfather's experience in Turkey as an Armenian. Turned out he had left behind a memoir, recordings, tons of memorial work that I was able to read and I eventually wrote about. And then I asked my grandparents, tell me about your parents. Where did they live? What do you remember? Memories, these kinds of things. So a really great way is to just start talking to the people in your life about their own pasts.
That's awesome. If either of you are taking the AP exams in the next couple of weeks, I actually love this TikToker called her name is Anti-Social Studies. She's an AP social studies teacher in Texas. She has AP, she has APUSH and AP World by TikToks all the way through. And she is awesome. As an adult, I'm looking back going, I wish I had this when I was in school. I am like relearning, and she just presents it in a way that is just so easy to understand.
What's her name?
Anti-Social Studies.
Oh, great.
Yep, I love her. Anyway, how might a research paper like Polygence's help a student towards a career path in history?
So basically, a project with Polygence would allow you to enact all the behaviors of a historian and see it come together. So it would allow you to do a deep dive into something you found very interesting in the past. So again, let's say, for example, it's 1960s fashion. You can say, okay, I'm really interested in this. Let's do a project. Maybe you want to do a webinar or make an Instagram account or make TikToks about fashion from this period. That kind of project is essentially what you will do as a historian. So it will allow you to take your first steps in that direction. And in fact, it might be something you can build on. Maybe you apply to school and say, okay, I want to do history as an undergrad. Maybe you write a senior thesis on some designer from 1963. And it all started because you were kind of exploring that decade of fashion through your Polygence project. So really, with something like history in particular, the sky's the limit. Even if it's not that direct, even if you don't write your senior thesis on the same topic you did a Polygence topic on, you've learned one way to do it. So maybe you end up writing about, let's think about something wild, like Irish nationalists in the 1910s, but you did this Polygence project on fashion history TikToks. Seems very different, but in fact, you've learned how to think of historical questions, find sources, weave your information together to create a narrative to convey the point you're making about fashion. You're going to be doing the exact same thing about Irish nationalists in the 1920s. And so it's like an exercise in that regard, or it could be that you find a topic that you stick with for many years.
What resources can a student use to explore and learn more about the history field?
Sure. So, I mean, the internet is a great resource. You just Google questions. I would talk to people to the extent that you can. I'm accessible. It depends on your questions and how serious you are, but you could always reach out to, if you read a book by a historian and you think, wow, that's really fascinating, I want to be this person, try writing to them. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to talk and respond. I have had many important relationships and opportunities develop because I sent a cold email. If you are genuine, if you are respectful, and if you care, an email can be very helpful. Yeah.
Is there a crossover between history and STEM fields?
So I firmly believe that any STEM, any science, any technology has a history, right? And it came to be practiced the way it is because of the way it had done before. It came to address a certain issue because of the way society operates or operated. I really think that to best understand the science, math, technology, whatever it is you're doing or using, you need to understand the context in which it's operating. And I think the best way to understand context is through history. And I think that will allow you to be a ideal practitioner of whatever STEM field it is. And I think it would, in fact, inform your work. So if you understand, say, the history of a particular, say, way we practice medicine, for example, that might help you think of ways to improve it. So one example is that, a lot of gynecological practices were developed on enslaved women in the 19th century. That might make you think about some of those practices that we still use, and maybe it will make you question why we do that or what it means that we have these practices, and maybe there's a better way. Maybe you can invent a better way to do these things. That's just an example off the top of my head. The point being is that I really think it can inspire innovation and new ways of thinking about the work you're doing.
So we don't have any questions in the chat, but if either of you have any questions, please, either put them in the chat, unmute yourself. While Nora is here, please take full advantage of Nora. Okay, let's look. If you want to work with Nora, what you do is that you go to the Polygence website. You can click My Account, and you create an account, and you create and you complete an application. You'd be speaking to myself or one of my colleagues in admissions, and you can request Nora. We'd love to have you work with her. If you have any questions, you can email me directly. My email is maureen@polygence.org. And that's the next step. And then, our last AMA webinar of this series is on May 5th, and it's on sports analytics. So that's also a popular subject. So again, before we go, like, any questions?
Okay, thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you found it useful or interesting.
Yeah, and thank you, Nora, and I'm glad that we were able to get over the technology glitch. And thank you for your patience, both of you, also for making the jump to the new Zoom. I appreciate your understanding with the technology glitch.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Oh, wait. Thank you. Okay. I'm gonna